The gavel was meant to sound like a promise, not a gunshot. It was supposed to be the final, triumphant note in a long symphony of hope, the moment our family became whole in the eyes of the world. I had pictured it 1,000 times. The judge's warm smile, the rustle of official papers, and the overwhelming wave of relief as I'd turn to my little girl Lila and whisper, "You're home. Forever." But the sound that shattered the silence of that courtroom was not one of celebration. It was the sound of a dream imploding. It happened because a hateful joke, dropped like a vial of poison by my daughter's own social worker, turned our most cherished day into a waking nightmare. The very air in the room turned to ice. A suffocating silence descended. And the judge, the man who held our entire future in his hands, he just froze, his face a mask of disbelief. This is the story of how one woman's deeply buried prejudice erupted in a courtroom, threatening to tear my family apart, and the devastating secret that ultimately brought her entire life crashing down around her. Before I continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, and leave your like. It helps a lot. My journey toward motherhood was a solitary one, paved with years of silent wishing and unanswered prayers. For so long, my house was just a structure of wood and drywall, its rooms echoing with a profound emptiness that felt less like peace and more like a constant, ringing silence. The quiet was a presence, a daily reminder of the child-sized hole in my life. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, the phone rang and the silence was finally broken. It was a call from the foster agency. A 6-year-old girl named Lila needed a home, they said, an emergency placement. They gave me the brief, heartbreaking details of her young life, a life that had already been a chaotic whirlwind of temporary homes, broken promises, and abrupt goodbyes. The file said she was shy and withdrawn, but when I saw her picture I saw something else. I saw a little girl with big, cautious eyes that held the wisdom of a much older soul, and a smile so hesitant it looked like it was afraid to be seen. Those first few months were like trying to tame a frightened fawn. Lila moved through my home like a ghost, a tiny shadow flitting at the edges of my vision. She would flinch instinctively at any sudden noise, the clatter of a dropped pan, a car door slamming outside, and her voice was a fragile whisper, barely audible. She didn't know how to unpack her life, emotionally or physically. She didn't know how to stay. I realized my job wasn't to be a mother, not yet. My job was to be a lighthouse. I had to be a steady, unwavering beacon of safety in the storm that had been her life. So I didn't push or pry. I just created a space where she could breathe. I filled the house with the warm, comforting scent of baking cookies and banana bread, even if she only ate them after I'd gone to bed. I started reading The Little Prince out loud to the empty living room every night, knowing from the creak of the floorboards above that she was curled up at the top of the stairs, listening. I spent entire sunny afternoons on the driveway with a bucket of sidewalk chalk, drawing elaborate, sprawling worlds of dragons and castles all by myself, feeling a little foolish but hoping she was watching from her window. Then one day, as I was shading in a giant yellow sun, a tiny, hesitant hand reached for the blue chalk. Without a word, she drew a small, wobbly, 5-pointed star right beside it. That was our true beginning, the little star next to my sun. After that, slowly, painstakingly, the shadow began to take on the shape of a little girl. Frightened whispers evolved into tentative questions about my day. Those questions blossomed into rambling, wonderful stories about her art teacher at school or a funny-looking dog she saw at the park. That rare, guarded smile began to appear more and more often, usually followed by a giggle that sounded like the softest wind chimes. We started to build our own little world of traditions. Pancake Saturdays became a sacred ritual, where she was the undisputed boss of chocolate chip distribution. Fort-building Fridays, where we'd drape every blanket I owned over the furniture to create a magical kingdom lit by flashlights, telling ghost stories that were always designed to end in laughter, not screams. My house, once a monument to silence, was finally a home. It was filled with laughter, with a smell of crayons, and with the boundless energy of a little girl who was finally learning what it felt like to be safe. It was her home. After 2 incredible years, the idea of adoption wasn't a question anymore. It was an inevitability, the only step that made any sense. Lila wasn't just a foster child I was caring for. She was my daughter in every way that mattered. She was the beat of my heart, the first thought on my mind in the morning and the last at night. When I finally sat her down and asked her, my own voice trembling, if she wanted me to be her mom forever, officially, her eyes filled with a universe of hopeful tears. She couldn't speak. She just nodded furiously and buried her face into my side, her small arms wrapping around me with a strength that took my breath away. We were on our way. That's when the county assigned us a new caseworker for the final adoption proceedings. Her name was Evelyn Albright. The moment she walked through our front door, a cold, unexplainable dread settled in my stomach. She carried herself with an air of rigid authority, her smile a practiced plastic thing that never came close to reaching her cold, assessing eyes. She surveyed our home not with the warmth of someone trying to understand a family's love, but with the detached scrutiny of a building inspector searching for foundational cracks. Our previous caseworker, Maria, had been a champion for us, celebrating our bond and seeing the light in Lila's eyes. Evelyn, however, seemed determined to find darkness. Her questions were never direct accusations, but they were always laced with a subtle, corrosive poison. "Do you know how to properly care for her hair?" she asked once, her gaze flicking dismissively toward a photograph of Lila and me on the mantelpiece, Lila's hair in the beautiful, intricate braids we'd learned to do together. I calmly explained that I'd taken classes online and that Lila and I had a whole Sunday routine of washing, conditioning, and braiding that had become one of our favorite bonding rituals. Evelyn just made a soft sound and scribbled a note, the sound of her pen on the paper feeling like a judgment. Another time, while looking at Lila's vibrant, joyful drawings taped to the refrigerator, she commented, "She's very expressive, isn't she? Does she have trouble verbalizing her feelings about her complex situation?" "Her situation?" I asked, my voice tightening despite my best efforts to remain calm. "You mean being a cherished, thriving, happy child in a permanent, loving home?" Evelyn's plastic smile tightened at the corners. "Of course," she said smoothly. "I simply meant the cultural transition." I tried to shake it off, to rationalize her behavior. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my anxiety about the final hearing was making me see threats where there were none. This was the final hurdle. The system is bureaucratic and stressful. Maybe she was just being overly thorough. I couldn't let this cold, strange woman cast a shadow over the most important day of our lives. We were so close. The court date was officially set. Lila had picked out a special navy blue dress, covered in tiny, embroidered silver stars. She called it her forever dress. We were a family. All we needed was a piece of paper from a judge to make it official to the rest of the world. I had no idea that the woman assigned to help us was methodically sharpening a knife, waiting for the perfect moment to plunge it into the heart of everything we had built. The morning of the hearing, the air in our home was electric, buzzing with a mixture of giddy anticipation and stomach-churning nerves. My own hands trembled so much I could barely tie the silken sash on Lila's star-covered dress. She stood in front of the full-length mirror, a perfect little piece of the midnight sky. She turned to look at our reflection together, her wide, innocent eyes meeting mine in the glass. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice full of awe. "After today, is it for real forever?" "For real forever and always," I promised, my voice thick with emotion as I bent down to kiss the top of her head. That single phrase had become our sacred pact. The courthouse was a grand, imposing fortress of stone and marble. It felt cold, sterile, and deeply impersonal, the absolute opposite of the profound personal love that had brought us to its doors. Our lawyer, the kind and competent Mr. Henderson, met us just inside, offering Lila a reassuring wink that made her giggle. "Just a formality, you two," he said, his calm demeanor a balm to my frayed nerves. "The judge has reviewed all the reports from the last 2 years. Everything is glowing. This should be smooth sailing." We walked into the courtroom, which was smaller and far more intimidating than I had imagined. The dark wood paneling seemed to absorb the light, and the silence felt heavy, authoritative. Lila's hand immediately found mine, her little fingers as cold as ice. I gave her a gentle, confident squeeze and whispered that everything was going to be absolutely fine. My heart was pounding, but I had to be her rock. The judge, an older man named Judge Harrison with tired but remarkably kind eyes, entered the room. He sat, and his gaze immediately found Lila. He gave her a small, genuine smile, and I felt a knot in my shoulders begin to loosen. This was going to be okay. The proceedings began just as Mr. Henderson had predicted. He presented our case with eloquence, speaking of the strong, loving bond we had built, and he submitted Lila's own letter to the court, a letter she had written in her best handwriting, stating clearly that she wanted me to be her mom. Judge Harrison seemed pleased, nodding along as he reviewed the file in front of him. He asked me a few simple, gentle questions about our life together. Then he turned to Lila. "Are you happy in this home, young lady?" he asked, his voice soft. Lila, sitting tall and proud in her witness chair, gave a firm, clear, "Yes, Your Honor." It was happening. After all the waiting, all the hoping, all the fear, it was really finally happening. I could feel the tears welling in my eyes, tears of pure, unadulterated joy. Then, the judge turned his attention to the social worker. "Ms. Albright," he said, his tone formal, "the state has received your final recommendation to approve this adoption. For the sake of the record, do you have anything you wish to add before I make my final ruling?" Evelyn Albright rose from her seat at the prosecution table, that unnerving plastic smile glued to her face. "Thank you, Your Honor. Do. While I formally stand by the written recommendation, I feel it is imperative for the court to consider all the nuances of this particular transracial adoption." A cold, hard knot instantly formed in the pit of my stomach. Nuances? What on earth was she talking about? Every report she had filed had been professionally adequate, if devoid of warmth. Judge Harrison raised a curious eyebrow. "The court is listening. Please elaborate, Ms. Albright." Evelyn's eyes darted cruelly towards Lila, then back to me, her smile somehow widening as it grew sharper. "Well, Your Honor," she began, her voice taking on a syrupy, condescending tone. "It's just so important that the child does not lose her connection to her own identity. We have to be absolutely certain she remembers where she comes from. After all." She paused, deliberately letting the silence stretch, commanding the attention of the entire room. She wanted this moment to land. "You can take the brownie out of the pan," she said, her voice sickly sweet and conspiratorial, "but you can't take the chocolate out of the brownie. We just have to hope she doesn't get confused along the way and start thinking she's vanilla." The words hung in the air, grotesque and alien. They were so vile, so utterly out of place, that for a split second my brain simply refused to process them. A joke. Was this her idea of a clever, professional analogy? A wave of nausea washed over me. I tore my eyes from her smug face and looked at Lila. My daughter's hopeful, beaming face had collapsed. It had crumpled in on itself, her eyes wide with a confusion and a hurt so profound it felt like a physical blow to my own chest. I watched in absolute horror as her gaze dropped to the brown skin on her own arm, and then looked up at my white one. In that instant, Evelyn's poison found its mark. My blood ran ice-cold, then boiled over into a pure, white-hot rage that screamed through every cell in my body. I started to rise from my chair, a primal scream building in my throat, every instinct I had roaring at me to shield my daughter, to physically stand between her and this monstrous woman. But the absolute, deafening silence from the bench stopped me cold. I looked toward Judge Harrison. His face had turned a pasty, ashen gray. His mouth was hanging slightly agape. The pen he had been holding moments before had slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto his desk, the sound echoing like a rifle shot in the dead quiet room. He was staring blankly at a spot on the far wall, his eyes completely unfocused, seeing nothing. He was utterly, completely frozen. The entire courtroom was trapped in amber. The bailiff, the court reporter, our own lawyer. Everyone was paralyzed, suspended in this horrifying, surreal moment. The only person in the room who seemed remotely unfazed was Evelyn Albright. She stood there with a self-satisfied, smug look on her face, as if she had just said something witty and profound. After what felt like a lifetime, Judge Harrison blinked once, slowly. A deep, ragged breath shuddered out of him. He slowly lowered his gaze from the wall and fixed it on Evelyn Albright. The weariness and kindness in his face were gone, incinerated and replaced by a cold fire so intense it felt like the temperature in the room had plummeted 20 degrees. In a voice that was barely a whisper but carried the crushing weight of thunder, he said one word. Out. Evelyn blinked, her smugness finally beginning to crack as confusion flickered across her face. Your Honor, I was simply trying to get out, he repeated, his voice stronger now, each word a shard of ice. He raised his gavel and slammed it down with ferocious force. The sharp, cracking sound echoed the fracture in my own heart. This hearing is in recess. Counsel and Ms. Albright, you will meet me in my chambers. Now. The bailiff, a large woman whose stern face was softened by surprisingly kind eyes, immediately moved toward us. She knelt in front of Lila, blocking her view of the chaos. Come on, sweetie, she said in a low, gentle voice. Let's you and me go find a quiet place and a juice box. The grown-ups just need to have a very boring talk. Lila looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears and asking 1,000 questions I couldn't possibly answer. All I could do was nod, my heart shattering into a million pieces as I watched my daughter, my brave, beautiful girl, walk away from her own adoption hearing, her forever dress now looking like a sad, discarded costume. The walk to the judge's chambers was the longest of my life. Mr. Henderson had a supportive hand on the small of my back, a silent, grounding presence. Evelyn Albright marched ahead of us, her back ramrod straight, radiating an aura of stiff-necked indignation, as if she were the one who had been grievously wronged. The small, wood-paneled office felt suffocating, the air thick with unspoken fury. Judge Harrison was standing with his back to us, his hands clasped behind him as he stared out the window at the city below. The silence stretched for an unbearable minute before he finally turned around. His face was a mask of cold, controlled rage. Ms. Albright, he began, his voice dangerously quiet. In my 22 years on this bench, I have been subjected to incompetence. I have witnessed gross ignorance and profound laziness. But never, not once in over 2 decades, have I been forced to listen to such a vile, openly racist sentiment delivered in my courtroom, disgracefully disguised as professional insight. Evelyn, finally grasping the depth of the chasm she had opened up beneath her feet, began to stammer. Your Honor, with all due respect, it was a poorly phrased metaphor. I was merely attempting to articulate the inherent complexities of. Do not insult my intelligence, madam, the judge snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. You weren't articulating complexity. You were peddling base bigotry. You deployed a racist trope to question the fundamental validity of this family. And you did it directly in front of a vulnerable child whose entire future and sense of self are in our hands. You didn't just cross a line. You took a blowtorch to it. That's when my own voice, which I thought had been lost in the shock, came roaring back from some deep primal place. She did more than that, I said, my voice shaking but clear as I stepped forward. She tried to poison my daughter. Right there in that chair, she tried to plant a seed of shame in Lila's heart. She tried to make my little girl feel ashamed of who she is, to make her question if she belongs with me, to make her wonder if my love is somehow less valid because my skin is a different color. I turned and stared directly at Evelyn, whose plastic smile had finally melted away, replaced by a sneer of pure defiance. For months you have been chipping away at us. Your little comments, your loaded questions, your looks of disapproval. I told myself to ignore it. I told myself to just be polite and get through it so I could finalize this adoption. I will never ever forgive myself for staying silent for so long. But I will not stand here silently now while you attempt to destroy my child. That little girl out there is the greatest thing that has ever happened to me. She is kind and brilliant and resilient. She is my daughter. And your hatred has no place in her life. It has no place in this court. If you're still here with me, don't forget to subscribe, activate notifications, leave your like, and share this video with someone. When I finished, breathless and trembling, the only sound was the heavy, ringing silence. The judge looked at me, and for a fleeting moment, I didn't see a judge at all. I saw a man with a profound, weary sadness in his eyes. He turned that steely gaze back to Evelyn. "This hearing is suspended indefinitely," he declared. "And effective immediately, Ms. Albright, you are removed from this case. But this does not end here. I am initiating a formal, top-level referral to the State Licensing Board. I am also demanding a full, independent investigation into your entire professional history. I want a special investigator assigned to scrutinize every single case you have ever handled, with a particular focus on every transracial adoption you have overseen. We need to find out if the poison you spewed in my courtroom today has seeped into any of your other work." Evelyn's face went completely white, a waxy, sickly shade of fear. "You can't do that," she whispered. "Watch me," the judge said, his voice as cold as a tombstone. "Now get out of my chambers." The weeks that followed were a special kind of hell. Our adoption, once a certainty, was now suspended in a bureaucratic limbo. A heavy cloud of uncertainty settled over our home, choking the joy out of everything. Lila became quiet and withdrawn again. The light in her eyes dimmed. The nightmares, which had long since vanished, returned with a vengeance, leaving her crying out in the night. She stopped drawing. She took her forever dress and packed it away in a box at the very back of her closet. She couldn't grasp the legal complexities, but she understood the core of it. A grown-up in a position of power had said something ugly about her, and now everything was broken. My days became a terrible cocktail of gnawing fear and simmering rage. I was terrified that the system would circle the wagons, protect its own, and that Evelyn's poison would ultimately cost me my daughter. Mr. Henderson was my rock, constantly reassuring me that Judge Harrison was a man of his word and that a serious investigation was moving forward. A few weeks later, I was contacted by the special investigator, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davies. I sat with her for hours, my voice shaking as I recounted every snide comment, every backhanded compliment, every and judgmental note from Evelyn. In the meantime, Mr. Henderson's office did its own digging and uncovered 2 other families of color, whose adoptions had been mysteriously and inexplicably derailed by Evelyn Albright in the past. They had been too intimidated by her and too afraid of retaliation from the system to file a formal complaint. For the first time I felt a shift inside me. I wasn't just fighting for Lila anymore. I was fighting for every family Evelyn had ever harmed with her silent, insidious prejudice. Then came the counterattack. Desperate to save her career, Evelyn filed a supplementary report with the court. It was a masterpiece of pure fiction. In it, she claimed I was an unstable and hostile guardian. She twisted my impassioned speech in the judge's chambers into a threatening and unhinged tirade. She reframed her disgusting racist joke as a clumsy but well-intentioned attempt at sociological humor, to which I had grossly and hysterically overreacted, thus proving my underlying emotional instability. It was a clinic in gaslighting. For one terrifying, heart-stopping moment, I wondered if it might actually work. But then I looked at a photo of Lila and me on the beach, grinning and covered in sand from a happier day, and I knew that giving up was not an option. 3 agonizing months later, we found ourselves back in Judge Harrison's courtroom. The atmosphere was completely different. The room was much fuller this time, charged with a palpable tension. The other 2 families Mr. Henderson had found were sitting in the back row, their faces a mixture of raw fear and fragile hope. Ms. Davies, the special investigator, was there, sitting beside the DA, a thick, ominous-looking binder resting on her lap. Evelyn sat with her lawyer, looking pale, drawn, and defensive. Judge Harrison entered, and a profound hush fell over the room. "This court is back in session," he announced, his voice booming with authority. "Over the past 3 months, a thorough and painstaking investigation has been conducted into the professional conduct of Ms. Evelyn Albright. I have the investigator's final report right here in my hands. And it is deeply disturbing. He put on his reading glasses and opened the binder. This report details a clear, extensive, and undeniable pattern of professional bias. In her 15-year career as a caseworker, Ms. Albright has overseen 38 transracial adoption cases. Of those 38, she recommended denial or derailment for 17 of them. That is a failure rate of nearly 45%. A statistical anomaly so significant that it cannot be explained by chance. It points to a deliberate, targeted, and systemic prejudice. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. 17 families. 17 children like Lila whose futures had been jeopardized by this one woman's bias. The case files for these denials, the judge continued, his voice dripping with cold contempt, are littered with the same coded subjective language and baseless accusations of instability and cultural dissonance that she attempted to use against this family. It is a disgusting, horrifying abuse of power. He looked up from the report, pinning Evelyn with a gaze that could shatter glass. But that, unbelievably, is not the most shocking discovery Ms. Davies made in the course of her investigation. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. What else could there be? During the course of this investigation, the judge said, his words slowing down for emphasis, Ms. Davies petitioned my court and after a thorough review of preliminary evidence, was granted a special order. An order to unseal a highly restricted file from the state juvenile court system. A file that has been sealed by law for 35 years. At the mention of a sealed file, Evelyn Albright went completely rigid in her chair. The last vestiges of color drained from her face, leaving it a waxy, terrifying shade of gray. It was the face of someone watching a ghost walk into the room. The judge looked down at the report, then back at her, his voice dropping to a quiet, scalpel-sharp tone. 35 years ago, a 21-year-old woman gave birth to a baby boy. The father of the child was an African-American man. This young woman was deemed unable to provide a safe or stable home, and after multiple failed interventions by social services, her parental rights were permanently terminated by the state on the grounds of severe neglect. That baby boy was later placed in foster care and eventually adopted by a loving, stable, multiracial family. The name of that young birth mother was Evelyn Parker, Evelyn's maiden name. The room was so profoundly silent you could hear a pin drop. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. You have spent your entire career punishing families for succeeding where you failed, the judge said, his voice thick with a mixture of pity and disgust. You looked at these happy, loving, transracial families, and you didn't see love or hope. You saw a painful reflection of your own past failures. And instead of seeking healing, you chose to inflict your own festering pain and deep-seated resentment onto innocent people. You used the power of your position to sabotage the happiness of children and parents, all to soothe a 35-year-old wound. The mask of professionalism, the sneer of defiance, the face of fear, it was all gone. All that was left was the hollowed-out shell of a woman, utterly consumed and destroyed by her own secret bitterness. For the second time in this case, the entire courtroom was completely, utterly frozen in shock. Judge Harrison closed the binder with a loud, decisive thud that echoed through the chamber. Evelyn Albright, you are a disgrace to your profession and to the very idea of public service. I am recommending your license be permanently and immediately revoked. The district attorney's office has a copy of this report, and I trust they will be pursuing all appropriate criminal charges for obstruction and falsification of records. Get her out of my sight. Two bailiffs moved forward and gently took a catatonic, unresisting Evelyn by the arms, leading her away like a ghost. The judge watched her go, and then his entire demeanor softened. He took off his glasses and looked directly at me and at Lila, who had just been quietly brought back into the courtroom by the kind bailiff. His eyes were glistening with unshed tears. Anna, Lila, I am so profoundly sorry for what this system and that broken woman have put you through. He smiled a true warm smile at Lila. Lila, you are a remarkable and resilient young lady. And you have an equally remarkable mother. He picked up his gavel. This time the sound wasn't thunder. It wasn't a crack of judgment. It was a promise fulfilled. Without any further delay, and with the greatest personal and professional pleasure, he declared, his voice thick with emotion, I hereby declare the adoption of Lila Grace by Anna Peterson to be finalized and legally binding. Congratulations. You are officially a family. A tidal wave of tears, the ones I had been holding back for months, streamed down my face as I pulled my daughter, my legal, official, forever daughter, into my arms. She was sobbing too, but they were the happy, relieved tears I had been waiting and praying to see. Mommy, she whispered into my shoulder, clinging to me. For real, forever, and always. That day in court was almost a year ago. The darkness of that room and the shadows of the months that followed have finally faded, replaced by the bright, vibrant colors of our life together. Lila's magnificent art is back on the fridge, a riot of color and joy. The nightmares are gone, replaced by peaceful dreams. Most of her drawings these days are of our family, just the two of us, holding hands under a giant, happy sun. Her forever dress is hanging safely in her closet. It's no longer a painful memory, but a treasured reminder of the day we faced down the darkness and won. Evelyn Albright lost her license to practice social work forever. I later learned that she is facing criminal charges for falsifying state documents, and is the subject of a major civil lawsuit brought by several of the other families she harmed. Her story, as tragic and destructive as it was, supposedly triggered a massive internal review of the state's foster and adoption system, leading to new policies and mandatory bias training to better protect families in transracial adoptions. Her deep-seated hatred tried to build an insurmountable wall between my daughter and me, but in the end, all it did was reveal the unbreakable strength of our bond. They say that love is the most powerful force on earth, and now I know with every fiber of my being that it's true. It's stronger than prejudice. It's more resilient than bureaucracy, and it is most certainly stronger than one broken woman's bitter, wounded heart. We fought for our family and we won. And every single day, when I look at my beautiful, brilliant, thriving daughter, I know without a single doubt that it was a fight worth winning. Thank you for listening to my story. Please subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, leave your like, and share this video with others.